Hey everyone, it's Amr, your favorite Amr from Toronto.
And it is Aaron, and welcome back to Das Criminal, a political true crime podcast.
And on that note, today's episode will involve crime, it will involve politics, but it will also involve so much more. It is a journey.
Oh, this one has everything.
Oh, yeah, everything. And I find it's best to begin with a warning. We've scoured the deep crevices of the internet to bring you this episode. However, we must warn you that the material contained therein may melt your brains. If you value your sanity, walk away now. But if you, like us, are intrepid explorers, then join us in following this utterly deranged trail of breadcrumbs. As Nietzsche once said, if you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into thee.
We're also going to give a second warning. We always try to warn you when there might be something a little bit disturbing, and we discuss in a very abstract way child abuse and sex trafficking in this episode, in the sense that, like, Jeffrey Epstein is mentioned, but that's the extent of it, really. Before anyone comes for us saying that we are stooges of the deep state or enemies of the people or making a joke out of this, we're not really. Like, we make fun of politics and cultural trends that we find ridiculous, but we're not going to quip about very serious things like child abuse and sex trafficking that have real victims and survivors. But if anything, I'd actually argue that it's the absurd conspiracy theories like the Alex Jones mass shootings are hoaxes type of bullshit that mocks victims and makes genuine discussions about issues in our society very difficult to have. And that's a problem, as we're going to get into.
Yeah, and it's also like a problem that spawned the actual crime, and that says that people who believe these conspiracy theories arm themselves and then go and do things and hurt people because they think that they're saving the world or whatever.
Right. And to some extent, this is like funny in that people are coming up with things, like drawing conclusions that are just so out there. But on the other hand, it's just very, very serious. Like, it's not funny at all.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny until, like, I'm in a store and some freak comes in with a gun and thinks we're all pedophiles and shoots us or something.
Exactly. Real world consequences.
Yeah. So what are we talking about, Erin?
We are talking about, I was going to say this is our first conspiracy, but it's not our first conspiracy at all. It's our first online conspiracy theory type of thing. But we did Operation Ajax a couple episodes ago, and that was a conspiracy, a real one.
Yeah, that one was real, and that one was proven real with declassified documents and so on. This is, well, without further ado, I think I'm going to get into this. Before I get into the QAnon theory that we're going to discuss today, I feel like it's best we should provide some background on what spawned this cult, if you will. The background being Pizzagate and the Comet Ping Pong Pizza Parlor. On October 30th, 2016, a white supremacist posts on Twitter that the NYPD has discovered, via the leaked Anthony Weiner emails, a child trafficking ring run by senior Democrats. In November of 2016, this claim has been picked up by multiple proponents on Twitter who scoured the leaked John Podesta emails on WikiLeaks, claiming they contain hidden references to pedophilia and child pornography. One of the common things in this thread is that the phrase cheese pizza is a reference to child pornography, as in CP, by people who don't want, like, child pornography as a phrase to, like, be saved on their emails or in their browsers or whatever. And to an extent, it has been used in that context, but people see John Podesta ordering pizzas, and they say that he's ordering a cheese pizza for the gang, and I think he's a pedophile.
Okay, a couple things. First of all, as a New Yorker who orders a slice of cheese pizza, ew. And also, I just want to note for any non-American listeners or people who just don't know, John Podesta has held a number of bureaucratic positions, but the important one to know here is that he was chairman of Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. So when people say John Podesta, that's exactly who they're talking about.
Correction, chairman of Hillary Clinton's failed 2016 presidential campaign.
I didn't say otherwise.
Yeah, but I did want to emphasize the failed part.
Right.
Well, in any case, the theory, once these theories are out there, they begin to take a life of their own. And in this case, it evolves through multiple right-wing and far right-wing Twitter accounts, publications, and so on, to claim that the senior Democrats, including the Clintons, Podestas, and so on, engaged in satanic child abuse rituals in the basement of Comet Ping Pong, a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. By December 4th of 2016, a Pizzagate truther from North Carolina, Edgar Madison Welch, drives up to DC armed with a rifle, an AR-15, a handgun, a shotgun, and a knife to free those children. He fires several shots in the restaurant, gets everyone evacuated, and searches the restaurant for this basement with the pedophiles. He's eventually arrested by police without any casualties and sentenced to 4 years in prison. So when we were talking earlier about real consequences to these things, there you go. Well, various far-right-wing conspiracy sites and news sites continue to propagate this theory even after he was arrested, and it escalated beyond wildest control.
Also, these are not the first false allegations of satanic ritual abuse to happen in the United States. We'd really encourage you to research topics like the now debunked satanic ritual abuse panic and note that allegations of widespread demonic child abuse have actually been fabricated before. There's one case called the San Antonio Four, where 4 queer women were falsely accused and convicted of satanically sexually abusing 2 young girls, and it's later proven to be made up. And we're not saying if people come forward with stories of abuse to just toss them aside and say oh, this is, demonic bullshit or something. But this does have a cultural history.
Yeah, a couple of things on that. I mean, first of all, is it just me, or was there a period in the mid-2000s where everyone was freaking out about Satanism in American society? It was the big thing, right?
It comes and goes. And it's the same with metal music, people will start to really think certain types of music are corrupting teenage boys, and then that kind of goes away, and the focus goes on violent video games, and then it goes back to Satanism.
But it's funny how Satanism is so centric to all these concerns. It's not enough for some of these people that somebody may be abusing children. They have to toss in satanic cult-like rituals in there. Abuse is bad. You don't have to sacrifice to Satan to be yeah, maybe we shouldn't abuse children.
Right. Yeah. And it kind of shows that these people are trying to cook up the worst possible thing. What's the worst thing? It's child abuse and Satan.
Yeah, I mean, because they're evangelicals, right? So for them, it's it has to involve Satan in some way to make it really evil.
Yeah.
Well, all of this is basically the fertile soil from which Q grows. Like a mold, like a fungus, if you will. Q began on 4chan, which for those of you who don't know, and thank God you don't know what it is an image board, which is not the same as a forum, by the way. In an image board, users will post anonymously, so your post is just tagged with a sequence of numbers that are randomized, and posters are identified as anon. So anon said this, which is short for anonymous. If you wanted people to recognize your post on those image boards, there is something called trip codes, which are a sequence of numbers attached to a passcode to identify a particular poster as the same poster across multiple threads, for example. This is optional. You don't have to have those trip codes. And unlike forums like Reddit, for example, where you need an account that is a specific account to post comments and stuff, with 4chan, you're completely anonymous. On October 28th of 2017, almost a year after the Pizzagate allegations, a user on 4chan posted on the board poll in a thread titled Calm Before the Storm.
And poll here, I thought it meant politics, but it doesn't. It means politically incorrect, just to give you some idea the temperament of the forum we're dealing with here.
Yeah, it's a good look into the psychology of 4chan. It's just a bit of a show of what they are, really.
Mm-hmm.
So just to clarify, Q is a clearance level within the Department of Energy in the US. And to have a Q clearance level means you have access to classified nuclear information. So this post, signed by a person identifying themselves as Q Clearance Patriot, is basically a series of bullets, the title of which, Calm Before the Storm, was taken from a Trump address to military brass in which he mentions a calm before the storm. And the initial posts claim that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is actually engaged in a secret battle with the deep state, a cabal of powerful elites who engage in child abuse rituals. Now, there's a couple of splits in these Q people's theories. I'm going to get to this later as well. As with all cults, there's always schisms. But some claim that those child abuse rituals are satanic. Others say they're a deep state honeypot to blackmail people. There's also questions about who Q is, and we'll get into that as well. But it's clear to the Q people, at least, that he's part of Trump's inner circle, he or she. And Q's role is to publicize Trump's secret war against the so-called deep state. For these people, the storm, capital S, is a millenarian event where tens of thousands of people, Democrats, Hollywood elite, Wall Street elite, the deep state, the military brass, that neighbor you don't particularly like who looks a bit fishy, they'll all be arrested en masse and face military tribunals for ritualistic child abuse, and either they'll be executed or sent to Guantanamo Bay. I'm not quite clear about that yet.
There are so many contradicting points, just so much to unpack here, and unpack it we will, but yeesh. It's like badly written fanfic too. Like if teenage me were writing a historical fiction drama and I was like, and then Margaret Thatcher was sent to the maze and she died of hunger there. Ha, I've done an irony. Like it's just so ridiculous.
Yeah, it feels like an outlet for these people's resentment and their hatred towards everyone they see as decadent or morally corrupt. And it's just weird to me because okay, so Trump is fighting a secret battle, but somehow the secret battle is not secret because this Q person is posting about it, arbitrarily. What?
Right. It also violates rule number 1 of an actual conspiracy, which is don't tell the public about the conspiracy.
Pretty much, yeah. What made Operation Ajax a real conspiracy was that it was top secret until it was declassified 60 years later.
Yeah, and there were whispers of it, of course, but not the same as someone just posting or writing op-eds for the New York Times saying I'm gonna overthrow Mossadegh.
Yeah, could you imagine if it was 1951 and there was someone that claims to be close to the Shah that's just tweeting Mossadegh is going down, follow the white rabbit, Mossadegh is a pedophile.
Right, yeah. We'll get into this more about the signs that this is not legitimate at all, that it's just a hoax, but I mean, it's kind of already, it already doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, you could see so many holes in it from the beginning.
So how did QAnon grow?
So I want to quote Travis View from the Washington Post when he was interviewed by Salon magazine, and he describes Q as such, quote, QAnon is based upon the idea that there is a worldwide cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles who rule the world, essentially, and they control everything. They control politicians and they control the media. They control Hollywood and they cover up their existence, essentially. And they would have continued ruling the world were it not for the election of President Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump, in this conspiracy theory, knows all about this evil cabal's wrongdoing, but one of the reasons that Donald Trump was elected was to put an end to them, basically. And now we would be ignorant of this behind-the-scenes battle of Donald Trump and the US military, that everyone backs him and the evil cabal, were it not for Q. And what Q is basically a poster on 4chan, who later moved to 8chan, who revealed details about the secret behind-the-scenes battle, and also secrets about what the cabal is doing, and also the mass sort of upcoming arrests and events through these posts. End quote. And that's basically the fundamental description of Q. But to get further into it, the proponents of Q, the fans, Q would post on these forums, 4chan, and Q would only post at 4chan. But then you have people who follow Q who will post on Twitter, Facebook, etc., their own theories and their own, conclusions that they derive from these vague and mysterious Q posts.
There's a really good video that the comedian Jim Jeffries did. Just search on YouTube like Jim Jeffries QAnon. It's on Comedy Central. It's on like his show. And it's just a really interesting look into how these people don't even agree with each other.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's schisms all over the place, much like any religion, really.
Right. And one guy is saying like flat earth is definitely a thing. And then another guy's rolling his eyes.
Yeah. It's a weird umbrella for various individuals with other theories that they believe in.
Mm-hmm.
They usually they would like they reference things like Hansel and Gretel, Alice in Wonderland, The Matrix. So like they'll say things like "follow the breadcrumbs," or Q would even sign his post with "follow the breadcrumbs" or "follow the white rabbit." Or Q people will identify themselves as being red-pilled in reference to The Matrix.
That's so. I mean, they're such unoriginal metaphors. And I think we've talked about this before on the show, but I'm like a huge snob when it comes to people clumsily appropriating art. And the QAnon people act like they're in this really deep 3D chess analysis, but follow the breadcrumbs is like the most basic verbiage there is. There's an entire section in Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities called The Track of a Storm, which is about the violence of the French Revolution. Like, there's so much literary material right there. Why don't you borrow from that? But they're like, no, we're going to go with red-pilled again. But that's the style of QAnon. It just morphs all conspiracy theories into one mega conspiracy.
Pretty much. Now, first of all, I quite appreciate the fact that you hope that any of these idiots would read A Tale of Two Cities.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, read a book, people. Read a real book.
I'm pretty sure these people haven't read Alice in Wonderland or watched The Matrix either. For them, it's just like pop culture reference.
No, they've probably listened to the Jefferson Airplane song and they're like, I know it all.
Pretty much.
But yeah, Follow the White Rabbit is not new. Like that's been a thing for a while.
I agree with your art snobbery, especially like, and this may sound absurd, but like, if you're gonna create your own cult or your own group or whatever, I don't care. Do it. Just at least be original about it, right? Don't insult our intelligence. Give us something new to digest.
I have this broad theory that fascist and fascist adjacent movements never really create their own aesthetics. Like, even the swastika was stolen.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even like now, modern fascists are like appropriating Norse mythology. Like their thing is like Norse stuff. Like there's no new stuff for them. It's just reclaiming old and esoteric cultural references.
I don't even have a problem with smart literary references, like reference Shakespeare or something. That's like cool to me because, again, I'm a snob. But red-pilled? You're stealing from the fucking incels? Are you kidding me?
Yeah. I'd like to see a Venn diagram of these people at incels. I suspect it's a lot closer than anyone would assume.
Oh, they hang out on the same forum, so...
Yeah, I can see that. They also tag themselves with the hashtag WWGOWGA, which stands for Where We Go One, We Go All.
Ooga.
It doesn't even roll off the tongue. Fuck's sake.
No, yeah, they're not good. They're not good at this. Not good branding.
Yeah. Back to their theories, though, which are another wild ride. Their theories constantly evolve, like it's constantly changing. For example, in 2016, a Democrat aide by the name of Seth Rich died, allegedly in a robbery gone wrong. But Q claims he was killed by the Clintons, who, through Debbie Wasserman Schultz, hired MS-13 to assassinate Seth Rich for leaking the Podesta emails to WikiLeaks.
So it's just so much like, why? Why MS-13? Why?
That's the first thing I noticed. I'm like, if the Clintons are gonna whack somebody, Jeffrey Epstein, they're gonna send like a professional, not like, outsource it to like a local gang or something.
Why not the Saudis who chop people up?
Yeah, like fucking get Mohammed bin Salman's death squad in there.
But their theories, they have to constantly evolve because they are bullshit. So it's like when a cult leader predicts the day of Armageddon and then like everybody's, gathered waiting for the world to end, and the day passes and nothing happens. So the cult leader has to be like, oh shit, I must have miscalculated because I was looking at Mars, but I should have been looking at Jupiter. Like,
Yeah, and it's funny because for the true believers, their faith just gets stronger because they don't want to feel like they've been fooled.
yeah, I saw a quote somewhere. I'll have to find it. But basically, scientists have to be right 99% of the time. And the 1% of the time that they are wrong, people go on and on and on to say that they don't know what they're talking about. Whereas with a conspiracy theory, you just have to be right 1% of the time.
That's a good quote. I like that. Yeah, that's
I
pretty
think
much
I
it.
saw it on Reddit. So if you said that on Reddit, thank you.
Yeah. Well, one of their claims is that JFK Jr., who, as far as we all know, died in a plane crash in 1999, is actually A, still alive, B, faked his own death, and C, is now actually helping Donald Trump fight the deep state and also somehow shows up to his rallies and is some like middle-aged guy.
It's this weird chosen one mentality that the son of a rich and powerful dynasty is going to show up and help save us. Contrast this with legitimate grassroots organizing that understands that we, the masses, will rise up and bring about change. And you see that QAnon is basically asking for regime change, where a more benevolent oligarchy is going to rule over us. And apparently, they have no interest in significantly changing the political structure of this country, right? They would just rather have the Trumps ruling than the Clintons.
Yeah, I mean, it also betrays a certain class element to it where for these people, for the QAnon people, and I'm just presuming here, they must be very well off if the only concern they have with the government is satanic child abuse that Donald Trump is going to stop. Like that's their only political agenda, it seems.
How come, okay, you probably don't know the answer to this because, again, it doesn't make sense, but how come the Kennedys, who are like one of the most powerful Democrat families, dynasties in this country, would be helping QAnon? Wouldn't they be like target number one? Aren't they like buddy buddy with the Clintons and all that?
I have no idea, honestly, and this is weird because like it's gone as far as a certain block of Q people saying that JFK Jr. is actually Q himself. I don't get it. I really don't get it.
Yeah, the Kennedys are the closest thing that this country has to a royal family.
I mean, like you said, it's a weird chosen one mentality. It's the scion of a powerful, wealthy dynasty is going to show up after surviving death and save us all. Kind of like
Yeah.
Harry Potter, really.
I was going to say with a lightning scar on his forehead.
Oh, read another book, people. Read another book.
But Harry Potter itself is like, in part, an allusion to like a biblical story, a prophet, a chosen one. It's
Yeah,
not.
except Jesus didn't drop out of school to become a cop.
So who else are on the QAnon hit list?
Oh boy, here's where we get into the weeds, if you will. So the theory goes that the Clintons, Obama, and of course the funder of this show, George Soros, are organizing a coup against Trump. So Trump, in order to outwit them, like this sort of like 5D, 10D chess, faked collusion with Russia to get Robert Mueller to investigate Clintons. And the counter coup is part of this storm where Robert Mueller will discover all these links with Obama and the Clintons and sort of arrest them for, I guess, treason. I don't know, pedophilia, treason. There's also reference to the Rothschilds being satanic and also behind this. So
Okay. Oh, God. I mean, all right-wing conspiracy theories are pretty much one degree of separation away from flagrant anti-Semitism if they aren't just outwardly anti-Semitic.
yeah, I mean, also like it seems like they're going retro with the Rothschild. Most modern theories just use Soros as like the metonym for Jewish people.
Oh, they have
So
both, though.
yeah, which is like a good mix. So just to reaffirm the anti-Semitism, in case you didn't get it from Soros, they're like, by the way, also the Rothschilds are eating children.
Right. And also, there is no political dynasty in the United States that is Jewish. There's never been a Jewish president. Like, I wish that Bernie Sanders could have the type of hold on this country that these people are so afraid of.
Yeah, man, I wish to live in the world they imagine we currently exist in. Minus the pedophilia, of course.
Yeah.
And also, they also believe in the Great Awakening, which is part of this storm where, like, the consciousness of the American public will awaken together to discover what's really happening, i.e., liberals being pedophiles and will be arrested.
Okay, this is another weird illusion that they're making because the Great Awakening historically refers to the US colonies. Preachers were really concerned that people were moving away from Christian ideals and toward secularism. So the Great Awakening was pastors pushing Jesus back onto people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it begs the question: are they using the Great Awakening in a reference to that? Are they aware of the reference? Are they aware of the allegory? Or
I mean, somebody must be, right? But
I
also,
guess,
awakening isn't a very unique word for what they're talking about. Like, you've got awakening, you've got enlightening, you've got wake up sheeple, which has wake in it.
yeah, that makes sense. So Q ended up moving from 4chan to 8chan. To preface this, there's been multiple people claiming to be Q on 4chan, and Q constantly has to change their trip code, claiming that people have hacked into their account. And so you have multiple Qs competing because it's an anonymous, like Q, it's a letter, right? So like you have people posting claiming to be Q, and then other people posting claiming that the person who claimed to be Q is not actually Q and is a fraud. And so you have all these constant like back and forths. Meanwhile, the actual trip code associated with Q keeps getting hacked, or I guess, I don't know if it's actually being hacked or it's a group of people, I don't know. So eventually end up moving from 4chan to 8chan, which is basically 4chan, but a lot worse in every conceivable way. Uh,
Mhm.
on that note, Reddit has ended up banning subreddits related to Q both in 2018 and in 2019, including r/cbts underscore stream and r/Great Awakening, which forced the people on Reddit who are like big Q people to shift to sort of a right wing Reddit called Vote, VOAT.
And think for a second about how Q uses notoriously right wing and anonymous internet fora to disseminate their information. This is what should tip us off that this is probably a hoax because think about what a legitimate whistleblower inside the government with pertinent information would do. I'll use Edward Snowden as an example because it's recent and a lot of people know about it, but it's a similar story to Daniel Ellsberg or Mark Felt or whichever, example you want to use. So if you are a whistleblower, the first thing you do is you contact a journalist who you think will be sympathetic and who has a wide audience. So Edward Snowden contacted Glenn Greenwald, who I think then was at The Guardian. I think Ellsberg contacted someone at the New York Times. Then you clearly release the information that the government is trying to cover up. Because the entire point of this is bringing shady behavior behind closed doors to the attention of the public. That's why WikiLeaks, for instance, releases documents. So Q is probably having a grand old time sending people on a wild goose chase. Like if I was a teenager and I was writing this stuff and it was getting all this attention, I would think that's fucking hilarious.
Oh, I would have like if I was born a bit later, I would have absolutely done this. Like it seemed like a blast.
Right, but just think for a second about how different this behavior is from a whistleblower, like a real whistleblower.
Oh, absolutely. And like none of the posts that Q, the quote, I'm doing air quotes, Q posts on 4chan or 8chan have any documents or any things. It's basically either using leaked emails like the Podesta emails and like highlighting something like, hey guys, I ordered cheap pizza, and being like, this is a code to them, buying children, slave children or whatever. Or just like very blurry pictures of Donald Trump shaking hands with someone and being like, yeah, this is Donald Trump doing secret battle with the cabal.
Yeah, and nonsense phrases.
Yeah, just absolute insanity, like just dog shit theories. But like these theories end up having like a very material and tangible consequences. So there's a couple of incidents that have been tied to the Q conspiracy theory that are actual like criminal incidents. In June 15, 2018, Matthew Philip Wright of Nevada drives up to the Hoover Dam in an armored truck containing an AR-15 and a handgun. He ends up blocking traffic for 90 minutes to demand that the Department of Justice release the real OIG report on the conduct of the FBI agents who investigated Hillary Clinton's email server crimes. So initially, the Department of Justice had released the report a day before this incident, but according to Matthew Wright, that wasn't the real report, and there's a real report that highlights much bigger corruption, pedophilia, I don't know. And he went up to the Hoover Dam to protest and ends up being arrested on terrorism charges. He claimed that the release report is fake. And in one of his videos that he does while in the truck, while blockading traffic, he says that he's disappointed in Trump for not locking certain people up.
This is a thing that these right-wing terrorists do as well. The Christchurch shooter did it. I'm not sure about the shooter in El Paso, Texas. I'd have to double check on that. But they live stream what they're doing on 4chan, 8chan. I believe 8chan. But
yeah,
it shows you, right, they are trying to get whatever they believe their message is across. That is, thing number one to these people.
They see themselves as modern day prophets in that regard, like that they want to lead people with their messages.
Right. And I really don't like the term terrorism in most cases, because I think you can just apply it to people that you don't like, like be like, and then the Palestinians, they're terrorists. And I don't like that. However, the point of filming yourself shooting Muslims in a mosque, like the Christchurch shooter did, is to terrorize Muslims.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And other religious minorities.
It's a deliberate project of sowing terror, i.e. terrorism, in a community for political ideology.
Exactly. Like as close to the actual definition of terrorism as you can really get.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that for me, I really don't like using the word terrorism. It's become such a non sequitur. Like it's been so overused that it means nothing anymore besides these are people I don't like and I'm going to call them a terrorist. And this is, by the way, just on a tangent, that's what I hate about, how when like things like the Christchurch shooting happens and leftists on Twitter, their immediate reaction is like, well, why isn't the media calling this guy a terrorist too? Or is it just only brown people? Instead of like actually unpacking the word terrorist or like saying no one should be called a terrorist.
I think also the media often do call those people terrorists. Like you just said, this guy, Matthew Philip Wright, was arrested on terrorism charges.
Yeah, and he's a right-winger, so like it does happen.
Right, but there's a much broader social problem here that won't simply be solved by also calling white people terrorists. That's not going to make hatred go away, right?
No, absolutely. And I agree with, like, honestly, just one of the things that really frustrates me with, like, leftists in, like, this obsession with, like, why wasn't the media called this white guy a terrorist too? And it's like, yes, but that's not the point. That's not the problem. That's not the point at all.
Also, it would be more accurate, too, to call him a violent fascist.
Yeah.
Like, that gets more to the heart of what he's doing and what he's trying to prove.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if we're fighting over labels, we might as well go for the most accurate label, which is, in the Christchurch shooter's case, violent fascist.
Right.
But that's certainly not the only incident that Q has inspired. And on July 29th, 2018, Q, like one of the people who identify themselves as Q, posts a picture of lawyer Michael Avenatti's office. For those of you who aren't aware, Michael Avenatti was a lawyer who was representing the adult performer Stormy Daniels in a suit against Donald Trump. And this unidentified man posts a picture of himself in front of the office holding a long package with the caption, "Message sent." Avenatti ends up filing a report with the police, but they can't find this guy, and they're still looking for him, apparently.
Weird.
Yeah, strange. On March 13th of 2019, Anthony Camello of Staten Island kills the Gambino crime family's boss, Frank Cali. Anthony believed that he was being protected by the President of the United States and that he sent by Q to do citizen arrest on Cali. And because Cali was like, what the fuck are you doing? I mean, you're not a citizen arresting me. Like, of course he would do that. He's a fucking crime boss.
Right.
Anthony ends up shooting Frank Cali 10 times and ends up being arrested.
Okay. Obviously, Anthony Comello, I would say, probably suffers from some serious issues. Like, he's having delusions. However, because he killed a crime boss, this guy is either going to get the shit kicked out of him or he's going to get murdered in prison, because that's what happens when you fuck with the mob. But the QAnon monomaniacs are going to insist that it's all part of a deep state cover-up.
Oh, absolutely. They're going to claim like the Clintons had him off because he knows too much or something.
Right. And it's like, everyone knows if you fuck with the mob, you get hit.
Yeah, and it wasn't just like some like a street level mobster. It's the fucking boss of the the fucking boss of the Gambino crime family.
Right. He knows people in prison, obviously.
Yeah. And in April of this year, just 1 month ago, Jessica Prim was arrested in New York City trying to board the U.S. Navy hospital ship, the Comfort, which was docked there as part of the COVID-19 response. She was also in New York trying to assassinate Joe Biden and kept claiming that the ship was used by a cabal of pedophiles to transport kids to be sexually abused. And even while she was being arrested by the cops, she kept asking them, what about the children? What about the children?
Oof, a lot here. Okay, first, when we talk about feminism being representation, like in terms of liberal feminism, this is why it's wrong. Like, woo, guys, we got a woman. But also, Joe Biden lives in Delaware, so she was, I think, a little bit off course there. Yeah, I mean, part of me feels like, so people that have mental illnesses, that have delusions or hallucinations, a lot of times they will kind of connect to something culturally, whether it be religion or, the government is watching me or something else. And I feel like that is manifesting in some of these people, and that's really sad. But at the same time, it has to be taken seriously, and these people need help.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I really pity these people, and it is sad. But on the other hand, these people are often, as we see, armed, extremely dangerous, and there needs to be an effort to recognize that there are tangible effects to this. Like guys with guns going into stores trying to free children, and if they don't see the children, they think everyone in that store is a pedophile and will shoot them.
Right. And also shame on the people who manipulate others who they know are easy to manipulate to do this.
Oh, I thought you were going to say shame on the pedophiles.
I mean, shame on pedophiles everywhere. But if you are in, I've been in organizing circles before where someone says something where the rest of us are like, hey, are you okay? Do you want to talk to someone? And it's not someone saying they're going to hurt someone or something like that, but maybe that they are really down or they're struggling with their mental health. And you as an activist and also as a friend should say, do you want to talk about it? Do you have access to the help or care that you think you might need? The worst thing that you could do is be like, this is going to be a person that we're going to manipulate to carry out our bidding.
Yeah. And it's reinforcing itself where these people get arrested because they're waving guns around and stuff. And the cute people will just say that well, the deep state is trying to suppress them and they're actually martyrs or freedom fighters or whatever.
Right.
And there are a lot of theories to get into regarding Q. There's a lot behind this that isn't just something to laugh at. I mean, there is a lot to laugh at. Believe me, I've done my fair share of laughing. But Q is very tempting to people because it builds off of known or proven cases. So Jeffrey Epstein or the Catholic Church and the child abuse scandal there. So it's easy to extrapolate from that there are secret pedophile cabals in halls of power.
Right. You can, if you haven't checked out our Patreon episode on the Oxfam Haiti sexual abuse scandal, we talk about how phenomena like child abuse and sex trafficking, they are fertile ground for conspiracy theories because they are deliberately obscured by the perpetrators and because they fundamentally involve one party using their power to exploit another, right? So if you look at Oxfam, for instance, you have people who have power being a part of the NGO sector who are exploiting local Haitians, and then you have them using their power to cover it up, right? So that kind of exchange forms the basis of a conspiracy theory. And these factors, when you think about it, right, a group of people is exercising an abuse of power when other people aren't looking. That actually is fundamental to child abuse. It's an abuse of power that happens behind closed doors. So I don't think it's fair to like laugh at that. You know, that's something that happens and it's something that has real victims. But Q is extrapolating that to the entirety of the political structure of this country.
Yeah, well, not just the political structure, but like Hollywood, Wall Street, the military, your local TV host.
Right. And anywhere where there are people and where people have power, as we said in the Oxfam episode, there is a good chance that some people will abuse that power.
Yeah.
And politics is just another place of power.
Yeah, and we saw from like the Epstein, well, what we know from the Epstein reports, that there are people in Hollywood who are abusers, and there are people on the Me Too movement, of course, there are people in Hollywood who are abusers. But like Q takes that as a foundation and then builds this idea that like these child abusing satanic worshippers, whatever, they're cabals of pedophiles and like they control the world. And also for some reason they're controlled by Jewish people like the Rothschilds and Soros. Like it takes a kernel of truth and it turns it into this like fantasy delusion.
Right. And it switches the assumption where if you said some people in Hollywood have abused others, that is true. But they are taking it to be, therefore, all people in Hollywood are part of this abuse.
Yeah. One of the things I think, though, that appeals to people who follow this Q theory, like they call themselves bakers, by the way, because it's follow the breadcrumbs. Again, really, really cliche pop culture references. But it appeals to people because it's like a video game in the sense that you sit on the couch and you post these pictures and these theories to Twitter to be part of this crusade against what is objectively considered evil, i.e. pedophiles. And you're going to save society and you're going to do your bit to save society and you're the hero in this story. And it allows a certain level of engagement without actual real hard work. There's no effects, of course, but it allows people to feel like they're doing something and making a difference without actually putting in the labor of doing the work.
Yeah, and it's like we talked about before too, like manipulating people with mental illnesses or people who are more likely to fixate on something. It gives you something to fixate on where you don't even really have to interact with other people.
Yeah, on the topic of interacting with other people, a lot of these Q-truthers end up being alienated from their own friends and families. And I've dug into this for some weird reason, and my brain is now rotted. They end up posting on these Facebook groups and these like Twitter threads and so on how their family won't come to see them anymore and their friends don't talk to them anymore. And then other Q-truthers are like, yeah, well, they don't know the truth, they're being brainwashed, etc., etc.
It's really sad. And I feel like it's also, we have the impression because it's online that QAnon is young people, millennials or what are they, Gen Z? But I think it's pretty stretched across age groups. And if you see the like Q supporters at Trump rallies and stuff, they're boomers.
Yeah, it's heavily skewed towards the boomer demographic.
Like the fake news on Facebook people.
Yeah. And it's sad to an extent. Like you see these posts, like he's actually quite heartbreaking in a way where it's like, well, my family won't come to visit me for Thanksgiving and stuff. And then the Q community, and again, I'm doing air quotes here, because you have these online other Q truthers who are like, well, we're here. And it's like maintains an illusion of a community that isn't an actual community. And that's just so dangerous on so many levels.
Yeah, QAnon, it basically inoculates itself against criticism by alleging that opponents are either members of the deep state or they're brainwashed by deep state pawns in the mainstream media. It's actually very similar to any other fundamentalist religion or cult preaching that non-believers are going to try to pull you away from the message, but you have to resist, right? Like Satan is always out there trying to drag you away from the message of God, but you have to keep going. And it's really hard because you can't argue with facts and logic because what they are doing is fundamentally illogical.
Yeah, there. It's not just illogical; it's illogical in the sense that it doesn't even like no amount of reasoning can convince them otherwise. And I think it goes to a certain level of martyrdom complex that exists within everyone to a certain, like different degrees. It reminds me of, and again, they use the reference, so I'm going to use the reference too. How in the Matrix they described that the first world that the robots built was perfect, but the humans weren't used to perfect worlds. They require a certain level of trouble in their lives, so they made the second world involve some level of trouble. And I think the Q being like alienated from your friends and your family, for these people, it just reinforces the belief that like they're martyrs. They're on the cause of righteousness and suffering for it.
Yeah. And additionally, I would say that the vagueness of QAnon's posts, if you read them, it's just word vomit, right? With occasionally it'll say like HRC, which is like, does that mean Hillary Rodham Clinton or maybe Human Rights Campaign? So because they're so vague, they're always, quote, correct because they don't actually make any concrete predictions. It's like psychic cold reading. So I could forecast something like, in the next year, a significant political figure will die, but it won't be natural causes, right? So, with the sheer number of current and former politicians around the world, many of whom happen to be older, and the varied interpretations of what significant might mean, of course, one of them somewhere is going to pass away. And it doesn't make me any kind of psychic or insider to anticipate that. But when it does happen, and it will happen in the year of our Lord 2020, if you believe that I have some insider information and think it's confirmed by this prediction, then you might also think I'm right in saying, like, oh, this wasn't natural causes, there's foul play going on, and feel like it has to be investigated. When actually it's like, no shit, some old person somewhere who was involved in politics is going to die this year.
Yeah, and like there's no way to prove otherwise, like for these people at all.
Right, but it's like walking into a bar in Ireland, a pub, and going like, is there a Sean or a Seamus or an O'Sheen here? Like, no shit there is. You're just making like the vaguest prediction, and people are like, yeah, she's onto something.
I sense walking into this pub in Dublin, I sense that someone is going to order a Guinness in the next half hour.
Psychic, I'm telling ya. Insider information. You are in the Varadkar government.
You heard this here first, folks. This podcast is being funded by Leo Varadkar.
If only.
uh,
Just kidding. We would never shill for Varadkar.
yeah. I wanted to conclude this bit with a quote from Richard Hofstadter in his essay "The Paranoid Style in American Politics," which I strongly recommend everyone read. It's very, very insightful.
Prescient.
Yes, definitely prescient. Quote: "One of the impressive things about paranoid literature is the contrast between its fantasied conclusions and the almost touching concern with factuality it invariably shows. It produces heroic strivings for evidence to prove that the unbelievable is the only thing that can be believed. Of course, there are highbrow, lowbrow, and middlebrow paranoids, as there are likely to be in any political tendency. But respectable paranoid literature not only starts from certain moral commitments that can indeed be justified, but also carefully and all but obsessively accumulates evidence, evidence being in quotation marks. The difference between this quote-unquote evidence and that commonly employed by others is that it seems less a means of entering into normal political controversy than a means of warding off the profane intrusion of the secular political world." End quote.
Yeah. So breaking this down, part of what Hofstadter is saying is that there's some appeal, right, to just being contrarian, especially in politics. And even if they're not QAnon, we all know that person who, if you say it's up, they say it's down.
Oh yeah. I feel like I am that person to some extent.
You know, a good technique actually for combating the absurd conspiracy is if someone says like they believe that the moon landing was faked, you go, You believe in the moon?
Yeah, just fight fire with fire.
Right, you have to out-contrary the contrarian.
Uh, you have to make sure you're the alpha in the room. They think they're the crazy. You have to like out crazy the crazy.
You have to watch that Jim Jeffries clip though, because at the end he tells them something like raise your hand or say yes or something if you've heard something in this room that you think is crazy. And they all say they think the other QAnon conspiracy theorists are crazy.
Wow. Huh. Talk about religious schisms. I guess like sectarianism in religious institutions makes a lot more sense through this now.
Yeah, because the more strict your interpretation is, right, the more things will fall outside of it naturally.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's the same with like religious fundamentalists who think that everyone else in their same religion is doing it wrong and is therefore like crazy or blasphemous or decadent in some way or corrupt. And they're the only ones who know the correct true interpretation.
Yeah. So we're going to just get into a little bit of political theory and sort of ask ourselves, why do people believe in Q? You know, what part of this do we think is absurd and what parts do we think, I don't want to say like carry some weight, because that's even giving too much credit. And I also feel like asking this question is very similar to asking, why did people vote for Donald Trump? And if we had a very simple answer to that, we would not be making this podcast. We would be policy wonks on MSNBC, not asking you to fund our Patreon. So,
we'd be making the big bucks alongside Rachel Maddow.
Right. It's obviously a complicated thing that can't simply be boiled down to like, they're angry white men. Like, even if many of them are, like, it's bigger than that. You've probably figured out by now that we do not think Q is genuinely a Trump administration insider, or JFK Jr. for that matter.
Or Trump himself, as some Q people have alleged.
Right. And we also don't think that Trump is trying to save us all from some sort of deep state pedophilic Illuminati structure. But I really want to break down the QAnon phenomenon into its most basic parts and then look at what we have. So take this Q character out of the equation, right? Strip away the psychobabble, and the most elementary assumption that we have here is that a small number of people with a significant amount of material wealth and resources also hold disproportionate political power and influence, right?
Yeah.
And I agree with this most basic assumption. And I think that most doctrinal Marxists, for example, would. But the thing is, I don't think this is any kind of covert conspiracy. It operates right out in the open, right? Nobody denies that we live in a capitalist society and that it facilitates enormous affluence for some people, while most people are never going to earn even a fraction of that wealth. And this is a verifiable fact. I don't think you have to be a Marxist or even follow any particular historical or political philosophy to observe that.
Yeah.
So the thing is, Donald Trump is one of those corporatists who also happens to violate women and then brag about it, we should note. He's also pals with Jeffrey Epstein. So I don't understand how you would look at the state of power disparity in this country and see Donald Trump as the solution, right? He's the ultimate crony capitalist. So that is where I pretty much immediately separate from the QAnon people.
Yeah, I don't see how Donald Trump can be a protagonist or a hero in any part in this conflict.
Right. And I feel like when you strip it down, again, to basic parts and you say, like, do a small number of people hold too much power? I'm like, yes. And you're like, do those people sometimes conspire together to maintain their hold on power? I'm like, absolutely, yes. And you're like, and those people do it by sacrificing children to Satan.
No.
Like, yeah, that's the part where you lose me. And I feel like if we want to dig a little bit deeper into Marxist theory, we can critique the idea of false consciousness, which Amr alluded to before, and then we can tack on to that Marx's concept of the superstructure, which is basically the government, religions, and other cultural institutions whose independence is entirely an illusion, right? So the cultural institutions in this country are not separate from our politics, right? They're constantly reifying each other.
Yeah, and they're justifying the politics.
Exactly. But according to Marx and later scholars like Foucault, there's no need for a deep state, right? It's just the state. The state itself is a power structure designed to protect class interests. And even the old school political philosophers like Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, they discerned this relationship. And even though they differed in their detailed analyses of how state power should function, they all said that the state is a power structure. One of its main functions is to protect private property.
Yeah, I mean, it's but a committee for managing the affairs of the entire bourgeoisie.
Whether you fall right or left, that's, again, not really a fact in dispute, right?
Yeah.
So, in that respect, I don't blame the QAnon folks for perceiving that there is a massive imbalance of power, because I think there really is. But I don't think that it's a secret, and I don't think that Trump represents any challenge to the power dynamics of this country. It's like when Naomi Klein says he's the ultimate brand.
Oh, absolutely. And I absolutely, I mean, first of all, like you mentioned, he is a sex pest and he's friends with Jeffrey Epstein. So if anything, why would he be outside of this cabal of pedophiles?
I think the QAnon people have legit said he had to like fake a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein in order to bring Jeffrey Epstein down.
Yeah, he was like deep cover. He was doing like him like, you know, abusing kids with Jeffrey Epstein was him doing like deep cover, the same way like an undercover cop would like take drugs or something.
Sick. It's just absolutely sick.
It's just insane. But it is fascinating because, and one of the things I want to go off of what you said is the way these things work. And I don't know why this is, but whenever there is a particular like conflict, like a class conflict, right, between the haves and the have-nots, the elites and the dispossessed, there's often at some point a certain resentment arises from the people who do, like the dispossessed, and that makes sense. But it's often correlative with certain moral puritanism, especially around sex, where the dispossessed see the people in power as being morally depraved, which they may well be, and therefore they must be all abusing kids or engaging in like sexually decadent acts. You see it, for example, and the example I'm going to use here is in early 20th century Middle East, with the Middle Eastern society sort of being colonized by Europe after centuries of exploitation by the Ottomans, and the Arabs basically sitting down and saying, well, why are we being defeated by all these external forces? Why is wealth in our society so unequal? And the conclusion they come to is, well, we're not morally pure, we're corrupt, we've become decadent, and the best way to do this is to purify, and that's basically where Islamism arises.
Right.
And yeah, I think it's interesting because, again, alleged, but I'm pretty sure a lot of people in power are abusers. And being in power facilitates abuse in a way that it wouldn't otherwise. But it feels really extreme. Like they recognize that there are people in power, the people in power abusing their power in various ways. And there are people who have no political power. And like you said, the false consciousness, it inculcates this idea that, well, they're all part of this secret cabal of pedophiles that are eating children, instead of just seeing it as is. Like, there's the dispossessed and there's the people with wealth, and having that wealth, accumulating that wealth, gives you undue political power in this system that we live in, the capitalist.
Right. It goes back to what we said before about basically constructing the worst enemy that you can think of.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, I feel like we should note that in order to rise to the top in politics, you must be unscrupulous in certain ways, right? You must be willing to run a campaign against another person or multiple other people. And in that, often you will have to expose the things that you believe that they have done wrong. And sometimes that includes, personal attacks and things like that. So you have to set aside certain values that other people might have in order to rise to the top. So when you keep in mind that people who have political power in this country, a lot of them have done so, then you are in some ways dealing with a different set of morals than the rest of us are.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, it's at a certain point, your hands get dirty, and other people who are not in power understand that, they recognize that. So for them, it's a small jump from being morally questionable to being a pedophile, a child-eating satanic pedophile. Though that being
Right.
said, I'm pretty sure in order to get political power in the US, you have to fly on Jeffrey Epstein's plane at least once.
Well, but I do think just as there are people who might go into professions like teaching or coaching or religious leadership to be in proximity to people that they want to abuse, which is like obviously sick and disgusting and not okay. There are people who get into politics to protect their own money, their own assets. There are plenty of very rich people in the United States Congress who go in specifically because they think like, I am a fracker, my entire business is hydrofracking, and I'm going to make sure fracking is always legal.
That makes sense, yeah. I mean, that's it's logical, right? It's
Right. It's
the
not even a conspiracy. Like it's
yeah.
again, it's right out in the open. Like rich
And pure
people.
self-interest. Like it makes sense
Yeah.
on their end that like if I have this much wealth and this much power, it's my self-interest and my class interest to keep this wealth and power by going into politics and running the world or the country or whatever.
Right. And that's what's so baffling about Trump's rise among people who say he's like so genuine or something. I mean, he is in that he is fucking notorious for saying the quiet part out loud, right? But he lets us all know that he is a friend to the American corporate owner, right? I don't know how anyone could argue otherwise.
The
So,
guy has a golden toilet in his plane. Like what at what point do you sit there and you're like, this guy is my friend? He has a golden fucking toilet.
right, exactly. So, how, yes, he says he is going to protect coal mining jobs and other things. But he also says he is out there for rich people like himself, and how rich he actually is debatable. But that is what he says out loud.
Yeah, and also the other thing that I just noticed that really like baffled me is, do you notice how all these people like they claim that the pedophile cabal is Hollywood liberals and the Clintons and Obama and Soros, and God knows these people have blood on their hands in other ways, but it's like it's this part of the wealthy elite, but it's never like the Koch brothers or Sheldon Adelson or like it's never the right wing wealthy people that are
Oh, what
you know
about Roger Ailes?
yeah, like Roger Ailes was a sex pest, but they don't bring him up. He's not part
Bill
of the
O'Reilly.
cabal. Like
Yeah.
as far as I've spent this week researching for this episode, and I've dug into various Q theories and various forums, my internet service provider has a hell of a ride with my history. I at no point did I see people mention Roger Ailes or Bill O'Reilly or Sheldon Adelson or the Koch brothers. Like, it's always Soros, it's always Obama's, it's always Clinton's, it's always Podesta. It's never the other side, which are equally corrupt and rich and have
Right.
undue political power.
Yeah, and that's why I believe that QAnon is a conspiracy theory of a conspiracy theory, right? It just distracts from the actual corruption within and around the Trump administration and the inequities and imperialism of the United States. It gives people something to participate in without actually challenging the status quo at all.
And it's also a conspiracy theory of a conspiracy theory in another way, in the sense that it discredits genuine allegations like Jeffrey Epstein and Trump himself and Bill Clinton by associating people who are like, yeah, well, Jeffrey Epstein did this with QAnon people. Like, you can easily dismiss someone who may claim that Jeffrey Epstein is a sex pest, alleged. That's like, oh yeah, well, you're just like those Q people, those QAnon people.
Right. And also ask yourself, if the QAnon people got everything they wanted, right? And Hillary Clinton is sent to Guantanamo Bay, I understand where people in like Libya who have a serious axe to grind with Hillary Clinton might feel like joyous about that. But from the perspective of these QAnon people, then what happens? Like, okay, so the Clintons and the Obamas and the Hollywood liberals go away. Then what? What's the plan?
I have no idea. I mean, you're talking about the same people that think that the COVID-19 response by Donald Trump is a cover for him freeing kids from basements across the US border that are being used by pedophiles. I'm serious. I read that theory. It's fucking insane.
I mean, it's also like, even if all these people were to just vanish off the face of the earth, right? Child abuse, and this is really sad, but it's true, most often happens with people that a child knows, family members, teachers, people that that child trusts. So by focusing on this broad conspiracy, you might be ignoring the children in your own life.
I was actually just about to say that, like, your child has a statistically much higher chance of being abused by a local teacher or gym instructor or priest than they do being kidnapped and sold to a cabal of political pedophiles.
Right. And this isn't to make anyone paranoid that, every adult in a child's life is out to abuse them or something. Of course not. Like, most people, I believe, are good people. But even in circumstances of widespread abuse, like in the Catholic Church, it wasn't the Pope who was doing the abuse, although you can argue like the Vatican had some part in covering it up. It was the local parish priests. It's happening at the small level where someone earns your trust and then they hurt you. That is unfortunately most often how abuse occurs.
Yeah, the Catholic version of QAnon would be that the Pope basically like orders kids and gets them like smuggled into the Vatican to be sacrificed to Satan and abused and stuff like that. It's a misdirection of where the actual problem lies, both in terms of child abuse and in terms of like political power and the class imbalances in our society.
Right. And as you said before, why does that have to be the case? Like, it is a fact that priests in local parishes were abusing children and that the higher ups were basically shuffling them around. So it doesn't really change things to say that the Pope is keeping slaves in his basement. Like, it is bad that any child anywhere is being abused.
Yeah. I don't get why it has to be exaggerated just for people to feel something. Like the local priest abusing kids is bad, and we should stop that. And that's that. There's no need to build off of that.
Right. And if you are a person who cares deeply about, the vulnerable and the marginalized, there are all sorts of ways to help victims of abuse to engage with organizations that prevent abuse. And I don't think any of them have ever advocated QAnon as one of those methods.
Yeah, absolutely.
Contact your local shelter and say, what things do you need donated? Especially because during the pandemic, people who are stuck at home, again, because most abuse happens within the family, people who are stuck at home with their abusers are in trouble and they need resources. So reach out, to them or the people in your community and say, what needs to be done? What doesn't need to be done is posting on 4chan that Hillary Clinton is out to snatch your kids.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what we said earlier, and that it is easier for these people to just sit on the couch and post and feel good as if they're doing something, like a genuine, like to contribute in a positive way to some hero's journey, if you will. Because actually going to your local shelter and donating and contacting people is actual hard work, and it doesn't pay off all the time, and you get exhausted from it, and these people don't want to do that. So it's way easier for them to go online and post about how Hillary Clinton's going to snatch your kids.
Right. So that is why QAnon is ridiculous, but also should be taken seriously.
Yeah, it's both ridiculous and dangerous. And I guess we should leave you with that, or
some might say ridiculously dangerous.
Yes. Others might say, what is to be done? And by others, I mean Vladimir Lenin.
But we're just going to give a final plug to our Patreon. If you guys didn't know, you can find us on Patreon at Das Criminal. And we give you a lot of bonus content. We're going to record some bonus content shortly after this. So we do twice a month kind of stuff about like what's in the news, what's going on, book reviews, stuff like that. And then once a month, if you're subscribed to the $10 tier, we give you a full bonus episode.
Yeah, so it's well worth it. There's already stuff uploaded from the past, so you can get our previous library of bonus episodes and content. So check us out and subscribe to the tier that you find most comfortable. Review us on Apple Podcasts. It will really help with our visibility. Tell your friends, tell your family. If you're not alienated because you've been yelling about Q at them. If you are, tell your fellow Q truthers about us. We're willing to negotiate.
Pick something new to fixate on, please.
Yeah.
But we appreciate appreciate you guys listening. No matter what, again, please tell your friends that we're out here. We drop new episodes on your preferred podcast provider every Monday.
Yeah, so happy Monday, everyone. And until next time, bye.
Bye, guys.